Oh, my booty, though.
Oh yeah. So you're gonna.
You had this before? Taste that?
It's good stuff. You listening?
Yeah, definitely.
Fucking machine.
I am going to have to pee soon. Should I pee now or get this done?
It's good.
No clapping, dick face.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the pilot episode, the inaugural recording, the first ever dual threat podcast, the official companion piece to the Gridiron Gala Fantasy Football League. I'm as excited as I am eager. I'll be your host, Sam Nix, here with my co-host, life partner, and fantasy punching bag, Nor, and our producer, Jason, behind the glass. Thumbs up if you're excited, Jason. Okay, not as excited as I am, but how are you feeling, Nor?
I'm just glad I don't have to get anyone a beer.
All right, this will be a weekly podcast. We aim to get it out by the end of each week of the NFL season. We will give you news and notes from around the NFL, dissect league transactions within the Gridiron Gala, and discuss the previous week's matchups. But today is a special podcast as we are going to break down the aftermath of Draft Day that took place on Sunday, August 20th. So, Nor, what are your immediate reactions? What stood out to you?
Well, right off the bat, I think that it was obvious everyone was trying to do the usual mixture of get impact players right now, but also have valuable trade pieces for down the road. So very early on, we saw a lot of youth come off the board. There was a little bit of, veteran value out there, and maybe even some veterans that you had to pay a little bit more for. But both of those gave way to up-and-coming young studs that people wanted to snap on their team.
Yeah, I agree. I was one of those suckers that overpaid for those veterans, but sometimes you got to go for the proven commodity over the unproven rookies. So sometimes you got to take that risk, and I agree with you. That was one of my immediate reactions as well, is the youth over experience. I mean, we had Fournette, McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook. They made up 3 of the first 4 picks, and then there were 4 first-round rookie running backs total. I mean, do you believe this speaks to a change in strategy of the league, or is this simply a product of a stacked running back class?
I'd have to say it's a little bit of both, but in general, I think having been at this for a few years now, I think we've all come to understand that running backs still reign supreme, even if they're younger ones that haven't quite proven themselves yet. If any of them pan out and, break the mold and become one of the even tier 2, or maybe if you're lucky, tier 1 running backs, then your team is really building around them and you're set for a long time.
Yeah, I agree. If you can hit on one of these picks, and history has shown us that these rookie running backs, one's going to hit, whether that be an Ezekiel Elliott, whether that be a Todd Gurley. There's going to be 1 or 2 of these guys every year that turns out to be fantasy relevant. And so I agree, there is a mixture of value, talent, and opportunity within this draft. So it's a great running back class with no real roadblocks to playing time for the top 3 running backs. That's Cook, McCaffrey, and Fournette. I think the future is bright for all of these backs, and none of these picks were reaches, in my opinion. We could look back at the 2017 running back class like we do the 2014 wide receiver class with Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham. No one in this class steps into a situation similar to Zeke last year, though. It really does take a leap of faith to draft these guys high, but the potential upside led to all of them being taken in the first round. So another point that stood out to me was the 2-time champion, Kevin Wallen's youth movement. We're talking John Ross, Mike Williams, O.J. Howard. Is Kevin ahead of the curve here, or is this misplaced faith in rookies?
I think when it comes to Kevin, at this point, we kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt of that he's got some kind of plan in mind. And if not, by mid-season, he tends to have a plan in mind, whether it's package something together for a trade that ends up, launching him into the playoffs and the term that I won't use that he wants it to be called.
Yeah, let's keep this a zone free of any kind of payday references. But I agree. It's hard, just like Belichick gets the benefit of the doubt. Kevin's a master GM, and he's done more with less. So we'll see what he does here. I know that fantasy rookies aren't really fruitful in their first year, so we'll see how these guys progress and if Kevin can hold on long enough for them to be fantasy relevant. But in all honesty, I'm not a big fan of these selections. John Ross has a very checkered injury history and is behind multiple vets that Andy Dalton has years of chemistry with. Mike Williams is injured and buried on the depth chart, but his big-bodied my ball mentality wouldn't necessarily require him to be on the same page as Phillip Rivers. So the missed reps in training camp aren't disastrous to his fantasy value. I've never been a fan of rookie tight end, as there isn't a strong case to be made for the fantasy relevancy of a rookie tight end other than Gronk in recent memory. So it may be difficult to carry O.J. Howard until a point where he is usable, but Jameis Winston does have a history of leaning on his tight ends ever since Florida State. Now, whether that tight end is O.J. Howard or Cameron Brate, or even worse, both, that's yet to be seen. I do commend Kevin on acquiring 3 of the top 20 NFL draft picks, so the acquisition of talent is clear. Now, whether that talent leads to production, we'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I'm going to put this out there. I hope I'm ruining this for Kevin. If any of those rookies do hit and he does start to float them in trade offers and things like that, that rookie option year is what he's going to be selling. Because if they do hit, you're going to have them at a super cheap rate for however many years it may be, plus even bigger discount when you hit that rookie option.
That's a great point. Spoiler alert for Kevin and his potential victims. I know that you know the value of that rookie option as you exercised it on Todd Gurley this year. Brandon Cooks on Tony's team has been exercised. So, definitely valuable if you can hit on these rookies and keep them on that rookie contract. You get them at a huge discount when that contract expires. So that's a great point. I didn't even think about that. All right. With those instant reactions out of the way, let's move on to the restricted free agency period. Now, we cannot lead off this segment without discussing Mike Ariola's spending spree in free agency. A total of $129 on LaShawn McCoy and Mike Evans. What are your thoughts? Is this a viable strategy, dedicating more than half of your cap to 2 players?
Overall, it's a little rich for my way of doing things. I mean, RFA, we know going into it now, having been at this a couple years, that you're going to spend in RFA. That's the goal. If you really want to get someone, you're going to have to throw down dollars for them. But to do it on not just 1, but 2 players and to spend that much on both of them, you're really hedging your bets that like all of your eggs, all of your footballs even, are in their fantasy basket.
Well, that's one way to put it. My thoughts on the subject is simply this. The move suits the owner, as this is a very risky maneuver. He's basically paying a price for these individuals that requires them to perform at their ceiling and play 15 to 16 games, maybe. Having these variables occur simultaneously seems to have a very low probability of success, but we'll see. It's definitely not a sustainable strategy, as both their salaries will be $70+ in 2018, so it's really a win now mentality, but it's a different strategy, and it keeps you from marrying underperforming players with long-term contracts. So let's see how it works. This might change the meta if successful.
I absolutely agree. I think it is definitely more of like a rental strategy than a long-term buy-in, as you said. But in terms of players I'd want to invest heavy dollar amounts in, I don't know if a 29-year-old running back that had a lot of carries and is on a team that apparently is not playing for this year already, if that's the person I want to be betting big on. But, as you said, leave it to Mike. He's a gambler. He went for it.
I completely agree on the LaShawn McCoy take. I was really a lot higher on him before Buffalo started shipping out players. You really got to worry about what that does to the success or the ability for him to succeed in that situation, along with LaShawn McCoy's motivation. I mean, yeah, like you said, he's 29 years old. He's got a lot of miles on him. He's got more carries on him than most starting running backs in the NFL. So it's going to be difficult for him to succeed in that situation. He is getting paid by Buffalo, and we all know LaShawn likes his money. So we'll see. I definitely am not as high on him as I was in July and early August. So another thing that stood out to me in restricted free agency was, how about Aaron Rodgers becoming one of the highest paid quarterbacks in Gridiron Gala League history? $33 for a star quarterback. Your thoughts?
Again, it's a big dollar amount, obviously. We touched on it in an earlier segment. Kevin does get a bit of a pass in a lot of his moves because of his track record. And him going after Aaron Rodgers, I think no one's surprised in that regard. But just it's so much money for one player. And I think that you can piece together 2 quarterbacks. I think anytime Kevin's won a championship, he hasn't had one sole quarterback that's his de facto starter. He's had 2, and he cycles them in there per matchup and everything like that. So he's made it work already. It was interesting to see him, of all people, go for Rodgers.
That's true. And you wonder how much the homerism plays into paying that much for Aaron Rodgers, Kevin being a Packer fan. But He's obviously the number one overall quarterback. The thing that stands out to me about Aaron Rodgers is, let's say 2016, Rodgers finished fourth in yards, first in passing touchdowns. 2015, now keep in mind this is the Jordy Nelson year where he tore his ACL, missed the entire season. Rodgers finished 17th in yards and 10th in passing yards. In 2014, he finished 7th in yards and 3rd in passing touchdowns. So, in summary, I think it's too much to pay. I hope it's not a dependency on Jordan Nelson by Rodgers to perform well, as Nelson is getting up there in age as well. I think Rodgers is almost assured a top 3 finish, barring health, but how many more points per game is he worth than Kirk Cousins or Phillip Rivers? It's tough to say that if that weekly advantage is worth the extra $30. The fact that you're paying so much more than your opponent and not being assured a top potential positional finish, that worries me.
I think the cool thing about this conversation is that it goes beyond just our league and our league format. This is a topic that gets discussed every year heading into drafts. Do you go for an elite quarterback early and negate one of the other positions that you might want to try and fill, or taking 2 quarterbacks, playing them based on matchup? The difference between Rodgers and the person under him, which is Matt Ryan, was 40 points in a standard scoring league. 40 points over the course of a 13-game fantasy season ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of like 3-point difference. Now, granted, I'll say as someone that lost to Kevin by a tiebreaker, 3 points can make or break your week many times. But in the grand scheme of things for a whole year, 3 points is a lot to advocate spending that much on a quarterback versus waiting on getting one later.
Yep, it's the old late round quarterback dilemma. That's a good reaction to the RFA period. I think we're going to move on now to our round by round analysis of the snake draft, or technically the linear draft portion of draft day. All right, let's start with round 1 of the Gridiron Gala fantasy draft. So we've got players like Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, Marshawn Lynch, Dalvin Cook, Devontae Freeman, Michael Thomas, Demaryius Thomas, Drew Brees, Joe Mixon, Martavius Bryant. Nor, your thoughts?
Well, starting off, I'll just start from the top, as it was my selection. I took Fournette just based on the fact that there's no challenge in his backfield compared to someone like Devontae Freeman. Obviously, coming from the Atlanta offense, touchdowns aplenty for everyone. He had a really good year last year. But because they're so diverse in their offense and in his actual backfield, you've got Tevin Coleman that can snipe some touchdowns. Any number of things could change that would give a variance to his output. So I thought with Fournette, no one else is there to steal anything from him. You've also got the upside with the fact that he's a rook coming in. So being that Fournette was a few dollars cheaper, that played a little bit into the thought process, but I would have loved if he was, maybe in the $30, $35 range, a little bit closer to the guy that went right after him, Christian McCaffrey. He also became part of the thought process, especially with the performance he had the day before our draft. I went home and I started watching the highlights, and I was like, man, am I overthinking it? I'm going young. Maybe this is the guy to go for as well. So as we touched on earlier, young running backs were the belle of the ball in the first round.
Yeah, I agree. And as I'm sitting next to the now Fournette owner, I want to know, are you counting on Fournette as a bell cow this year, or is this made for maybe skate by this year and then really profit off of this investment in the years to come as he profiles as a potential workhorse for the Jaguars?
Ideally, best case scenario for me, I think, right now would be that Fournette ends up finishing the year as like a solid RB2. If he does any better than that, I'm going to be even more pleased with his output. What I'm really banking on, which makes me sweat a little more than maybe humanly possible right now, is the bounce back of Todd Gurley. I'm expecting Todd Gurley to be an RB1 on my team, which gives Fournette kind of this year to get acclimated. Maybe Jacksonville makes whatever adjustments they need to make on offense to give him the better offense to get it together. But the plan for me long term is to build around Fournette as a potential RB1 down the road.
Okay, well, we'll see if that turns out profitable for you. I know that I was living in a alternate universe where I thought that Fournette would fall to me, and I debated all these scenarios and these different situations to myself. So I'm glad that you took that off my plate and I don't have to worry about it now. But Something that stood out to me in round one was excluding the rookie running back run in the first round. I would say Marshawn Lynch at 103. Sorry, Jason behind the glass, but this surprised me. We haven't seen Marshawn since 2015, and to pick him in a contract league over Devontae Freeman, Dalvin Cook, Isaiah Crowell, which were all on the board during your pick, and all which could be potentially safer picks and could have been greater long-term values. It's a risky move, no doubt. Let's move on to round two. The picks were Spencer Ware, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Isaiah Crowell, Allen Robinson, Dante Moncrief, Jimmy Graham, Mark Ingram, Corey Davis, and Darren McFadden. Nor your thoughts?
Well, one of my favorite parts of not just drafts in general, but live drafts especially, is that moment when someone makes a selection and the majority of the room like lets out a groan or something like that. Like they all had their eyes on that player. And I think in this round, it happened early. Clearly, a lot of guys were pining for Tyreek Hill. You were trying to trade up with me to get to the top pick in the round. I'm assuming to try and take him, given your reaction when Mike ended up taking him off the board. But I guess what I'm curious about is, was I the only one that thinks Tyreek Hill was overdrafted?
I know that he's a very divisive player. There are some that love, and there are some that think he's a gadget player and that he can't produce on a consistent basis. I'm in the former group. I think Tyreek Hill is a star in the making. I think that the only thing that supersedes his football IQ and his route running is his speed, agility, and quickness. So I think if you combine and you marry those traits, you've got a really successful football player in the NFL. And so I think that Andy Reid envisions Tyreek Hill as a big part of this offense. They let Jeremy Maclin go. I know it was for salary cap situations, but you don't feel comfortable letting a Jeremy Maclin go unless you have some kind of replacement. And he's going to be featured early and often. And I think that Andy Reid's going to find a way to put the ball in a lot of creative ways into Tyreek Hill's hands, and he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. Believe me, when he went off the board, I had been planning to take Tyreek Hill all along in the first. I think that's a great pick. Again, it's very divisive. We're gonna see these factions collide during the season because there's going to be those that said I told you so, and they're going to be on both sides, and that's whether Tyreek Hill performs or not. The thing that stood out to me in round two, a lot of good value and talent. There's a lot of players in this round that would typically make up the first round of a previous year's draft, and it speaks to the depth of this year's draft in comparison to previous year's draft. I mean, you know my love for Tyreek Hill, Spencer Ware, I think could be a very usable fantasy asset. Devontae Adams, Isaiah Crowell, Allen Robinson, Jimmy Graham, Mark Ingram. Everybody knows my disdain for Gomez for taking Corey Davis from me. Darren McFadden could be a usable asset depending on Zeke's suspension. So I think this is a really deep class. And typically the second round is filled with the fodder left over. And really we're all fighting and bickering for first round picks. But I think this year was super deep and it showed in round two. All right, moving on to round three. We have the selections of Randall Cobb, Mike Gillislee, Terrence West, Alvin Kamara, Russell Wilson, Jamison Crowder, Frank Gore, Deshaun Jackson, Paul Perkins, and Balil Powell. Nor, your thoughts?
Well, starting right off the top, a little bit buyer's remorse. I mean, I don't dislike Randall Cobb as a player. Obviously, I think he's proven that he can play in the league and really put up some big numbers. He's 2 years at least removed from that now. But knowing how the rest of the draft went and the litany of young wide receivers that went after him, whether they're rookies or second-year guys or anything like that, I would have probably rather taken a swing at one of them as opposed to taking what I thought was, a valuable asset in Randall Cobb, which I still think he is. But given that I'm someone that likes to take a couple dart throws at least on a rookie wide receiver, maybe not to the volume of like a Kevin or Slater took a few as well. I still would have liked to have got one that I could maybe just try and see how it works out. So a little buyer's remorse there. But in general, I think you got some good players. I dig the Jameson Crowder pick. I like in terms of not just value, but what I think he's going to be in the offense this year. I think he's going to really help fill the shoes of maybe not Deshaun Jackson down the field, but in terms of intermediate passing game, kind of being a bit of a safety valve. He's got the chemistry with Kirk Cousins. I really like that pick. I think Terrence West is one of those running backs that people just don't like to really think about or talk about, but in reality, he ends up being a pretty solid either flex play or some weeks, depending on touchdown availability, maybe even RB2. You never know. Gillislee, he's one of the sexier players in the draft in terms of what people are expecting him to output, both in the red zone and on the goal line. But my apprehension there is no one knows what Bill Belichick's planning in terms of running back usage and who they're going to use from week to week. So I try to stay away from their backfield in general. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Alvin Kamara, hell of a player at Tennessee that we all watched while he was in college. He's in one of the most crowded backfields in recent memory with Mark Ingram ahead of him, AP. How much do the Saints run in the first place, given their propensity for breeze and passing? It's a lot of questions there, but huge upside. I was really interested to see how this round came out.
All right, what stood out to me was the risky running back selection. So this round was full of running backs that owners must have had to close their eyes before selecting. I mean, Mike Gillislee, Alvin Kamara, Frank Gore, Paul Perkins, Bilal Powell. These picks definitely have upside and some clear paths to playing time, but they all objectively carry a lot of risk, and none of their owners could feel too confident about starting them week 1 before we see how their playing situations shake out. Let's move on to round 4. The picks were Ty Montgomery, Ben Roethlisberger, Andrew Luck, Golden Tate, Taylor Gabriel, a.k.a. Tay Gay, Jonathan Stewart, Seahawks defense, Martellus Bennett, Pierre Garçon, and Derek Carr. Nor your thoughts.
First takeaways are you started to see some of the quarterbacks really go off the board. I mean, three of the picks in the round, Roethlisberger, Luck, Carr. It was interesting to see Roethlisberger and Luck both go before Carr. I would have expected maybe one of them to end up going after him just based on health. Ben's been prone to missing games here and there. You've got the home road split you've got to wonder about. Luck is currently slated to potentially not play week 1. You don't know if that's going to carry over into maybe week 2 versus Carr, who, did get hurt himself towards the end of the year, but prior to that was an MVP candidate. I was wondering when he was going to go. I was definitely keeping my eye on him. One of the guys I had on my board as well. So it was interesting to see him go just at the end of the round, right before my pick in the next round.
There are few things certain in life: death, taxes, and Corey Hart reaching for the Seahawks defense. Setting aside the skill position players Corey passed on to make the selection, are the Seahawks worth the reach at this point? Are they the clear-cut top defense/special teams? I don't think so. I mean, they finished 12th in standard scoring and points per game in 2016, 5th in 2015, and 7th in 2014. So the draft capital you're spending isn't even ensuring that you're securing a top 5 fantasy defense. I don't know what Corey's plan is at this point, if it's just name recognition. I know that I typically attack Corey very ferociously at the end of his drafts, but I thought we were past this, Corey. I thought the abuse was over. What have the Seahawks defense done to you?
There's a couple different sayings in terms of like descriptive terms. There's haters gotta hate, and there's Manny being Manny, and there's things like that happen in sports. I think sometimes Corey's just got a Corey, and he's gonna drop a little bit of a grenade in the middle of the room just to watch everyone's reactions. And I think this had all the makings of one of those picks.
You know what? That makes complete sense. I see it now. Corey, he's been building for the future. He thinks his team is set. Why not get a little shock reaction, a little shock value out of his picks moving forward? That is right up Corey's alley. I agree. Let's move on to round 5. Again, the run on quarterbacks continues with Kirk Cousins, Cam Newton, Rex Burkhead, Tyrell Williams, Matt Ryan, Jeremy Maclin, Donta Foreman, Eric Decker, Matt Forte, and O.J. Howard. Nor, your thoughts?
Even more quarterbacks off the board, and people started to kind of fill out the rest of their rosters at this point in the draft. I dug what Tyrell Williams was able to do in replacement effort for Keenan Allen last year, but I'm not quite sure where he's going to fit in the offense right now. So I thought that's more of like a expecting Keenan Allen to get hurt type of selection versus maybe going in another direction. But again, getting a look at the big picture, Ferals was clearly in this draft to try and just get as many bodies on his roster as possible. So he did get a large one with Tyrell Williams, and we'll see how it works out. I really thought Cam Newton was going to end up slipping a little bit more, given the fact that Roethlisberger and Luck had already kind of been taken. I felt like the tier drop-off was going to happen there. So maybe it was just the fact that Kirk Cousins went to lead off the round. Cam Newton was the very next pick. Maybe that was the thought process. Seeing some of the other picks to round out the round, Matt Forte, obviously one of the better fantasy players over the last decade, but on the Jets, given their overall outlook on offense and what they're turning into, which is they'd aspire to be a dumpster fire at this point. They're like clearly going backwards in terms of football. They're playing for 2018 more than Corey is right now.
Yeah, are the Jets playing for 2018 or are they playing for 2020, 2021? We'll see. Now, Nora, I need you to stay with me here, okay? I'm going to go to a place that I never thought I'd go, okay? Rex Burkhead went at the 503 to Jason. Now, this pick is intriguing to me as Burkhead is not spectacular athletically, but he is the perfect Belichick / New England Patriots player. He has the ability to run inside, outside, block, catch the ball out of the backfield, and be dynamic after the catch. Basically, he can make the offense unpredictable and multiple, which LeGarrette Blount could not do last season. And Belichick has stated this offseason he wants to make a move toward. Now, this is more than I ever anticipated discussing Rex Burkhead's fantasy value, but what do you think? Are you nervous for Mike Gillislee's fantasy outlook in 2017?
I think the Patriots have proven that they're clearly happy with not just a shared, but a convoluted backfield. They don't want you to know who to start in fantasy. They don't want their opponents to know who to be expecting to come out of the backfield or who's going to get the bulk of the carries. They kind of love that. They love having everyone on the edge of their seat, on their heels in both situations.
Yep, completely agree. You're rolling the dice if you ever pick any New England running back. I heard today that the Patriots don't even plan on releasing a depth chart weekly for their running back situation. So they want to keep their opponents guessing, and unfortunately they're going to keep their fantasy owners guessing as well. You got to feel for Ariola and Jason, who spent draft capital on these running backs. It's going to be a guessing game. Let's move on to round 6. The round was made up of LeGarrette Blount, Kansas City Chiefs defense, Jamal Charles, Cole Beasley, Zay Jones, Kenny Golladay, Matt Bryant, Mike Williams, Jameis Winston, and Chris Hogan. Nor your thoughts.
Quick shout out to LeGarrette Blount. We have no idea about his fantasy value right off the bat. Is he the lead back in Philly? It'd be pretty surprising at this point, given the type of offense they're gonna feature. In a true West Coast system, he's maybe your yardage in your goal line back, but there's rumors of him maybe being cut and he's not a fit. I think someone made a joke about this during the draft, and the immediate response was, "Oh, cool! The Patriots will just pick him up and he'll get another 16 touchdowns or something this year." So LeGarrette Blount is he's a big enigma to me. Taking a look at some of the other names on the board, I got to give a shout out to Slater for the double dip rookie receiver here. Zay Jones, Kenny Golladay. I know we had a lot to say about the Buffalo offense earlier in terms of what kind of effect it's going to have on Shady, but in terms of volume and potential output, Zay Jones is going to get a lot of targets. They traded away Sammy Watkins. I think there's going to be a lot to like there. Kenny Golladay is just that guy that's just making noise all preseason, so you don't know. Is he just doing it right now because he's playing against, fourth stringers and third stringers and guys that don't make teams, or is he really just a gem and a diamond in the rough that they found?
Yeah, I completely agree. If round 1 was the round for rookie running backs, I think round 6 was the round of rookie wide receivers. So do me a favor, rank the following rookie wide receivers just for 2017. So we have Zay Jones, Kenny Golladay, and Mike Williams of the Chargers.
Overall, right off the bat, I'd probably have to say I think Zay Jones would be my bet to be ranked 1 out of those 3. Mike Williams, it's really just as an issue of we don't know when he's coming back. Once he's back, with the amount the Chargers throw it and the fact that he's a big body receiver like you touched on earlier, he could have value immediately, but you don't know when he's going to hit the field. Conversely, Kenny Golladay is stepping into a role that was previously filled by Anquan Bolden. I believe he ended up with like 7 touchdowns last year. The Lions throw it a ton. Stafford he's a socialist when it comes to the ball. Everyone gets the ball. He throws it to everybody. So I think there's plenty of opportunity there. I'd have to go Zay Jones 1, Kenny Golladay 2 right now, Mike Williams 3. But that really just depends on Mike Williams' return time. As soon as we get a clearer scope of that, I could maybe even put him 1 if he was going to hit the field sooner.
Yeah, I think it's fine to take a shot on a rookie wide receiver, but the league format makes it difficult to wait on these late bloomers. So you really need them to break out early or risk cutting your valuable asset.
Something I know personally.
Let's move on to round 7. Okay, so that round was made up of, led off by Zach Ertz, Steven Gostkowski, Mohamed Sanu, Dan Bailey, Theo Riddick, Jamal Williams, Jacquizz Rodgers, Rashard Perriman, Cooper Kupp, and John Ross. Your thoughts, Nor?
And I feel bad that I've had now 2 rounds that I've been able to lead off with a little bit of buyer's remorse with myself, but I guess that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. I do like Zach Ertz. I think the opportunity is going to be really good for him, especially if Carson Wentz can take the next step. They traded away Jordan Matthews for a reason. I think They saw him as an expendable asset. That hopefully means more targets for Ertz, but Ertz could also easily be that guy that, based on athleticism and apparent opportunity, you expect him to take the next step, and he continues to not take it. So if he doesn't this year, who knows what the future is going to hold for Zach Ertz. But I decided that I wanted to try and plug him into my roster. In doing so, I yet again missed out on rookie receivers, of which I would have liked to have at least one. Cooper Kupp probably being the primary of the two that got taken this round. I do think John Ross has some great upside. Like you said, there's some question marks. He fits right into the Cincinnati offense, but I think the chemistry we're already seeing from Cooper Kupp and Jared Goff from the get-go feels like that could be the next guy to just kind of hit the ground running and be a force to be reckoned with.
Yep. The thing that stood out to me about round 7 was value. I love the value in this round. Leading off with Zach Ertz. You may have buyer's remorse, but I think that Jordan Matthews trade really helps Zach Ertz control the middle of the field for the Eagles offense. I think he's going to be a PPR machine. Unfortunately, it's not PPR. But still, a lot of catches, a lot of middle field. You just got to hope he sees the end zone more times than not. I like the Jaquiz Rodgers pick. I love the Cooper Kupp pick, like you touched on. I think I agree with the Rams coaching staff. I think he could be in the running for Rookie of the Year, depending on his usage. I think these are all possible fantasy starters. Rodgers being for the first 3 weeks of Doug Martin's suspension. And to pick them up in the 7th round, to me, is good value. Moving on to round 8. We've got Kareem Hunt. We have a pass, the annual first pass by Areola. We have Austin Hooper, Tyrod Taylor, Matthew Stafford, Texas defense, Carson Wentz, Cameron Meredith, Antonio Gates, and Vikings D. Nor your thoughts.
A lot of upside in this round, in my opinion. Austin Hooper, young tight end in a pass-friendly offense, seemed to gel with Matt Ryan last year. You feel like he could easily continue to be a relevant fantasy tight end. Matt Stafford, Slater can't stay away. I think it's proven. It's clear here. There is seriously something between the two of them that Slater's not telling us about because he won't let him go. Carson Wentz, obviously, great rookie year. He hit the normal rookie wall as expected, but all the additions they made on offense, you expect him to be a very valuable fantasy asset. In Corey's case, he's just looking for a 1 week start here or there.
Yep, all good points. I think the thing we need to really address is Corey Hart's self-discipline and his control for not physically assaulting Jason or JB behind the glass for taking Austin Hooper, his Corey's love child. I don't know how that physical altercation didn't take place, but I think Corey's self-control should be commended. Tyrod Taylor to Ferralis at 804 really stood out to me. I understand the appeal of a mobile quarterback, and we're all taking shots in the dark at this point, but with Phillip Rivers and Dak Prescott already on the roster, is this too much salary, draft capital, and roster spots dedicated to a QB position? We'll see. I don't know what his plan is. He definitely does have to cut down on his roster, but we'll see if Tyrod is one of those cuts.
I believe he did also take Deshaun Watson, which, again, another good dart throw, but you're adding roster spots for a position that I think most teams maybe not going to have more than 2, certainly not more than 3.
Definitely agree. All right, moving on to round 9. Made up of Cardinals defense, Julius Thomas, the New England Patriots defense, the aforementioned Deshaun Watson, Jonathan Williams, Eli Manning, Samaje Perine, Devontae Parker, Andy Dalton, and Jeremy Hill. Nor, what do you got?
Immediate takeaway is, I got to say, getting Andy Dalton this late in the game. Gomez might not need a lot from depending on which quarterback he's going to roll with, but Andy Dalton's a very serviceable fantasy quarterback. I think 3 of the last 4 years he's been in the top 12 in terms of fantasy output. He's a guy that you can count on week to week most of the time. And then, who knows? Maybe if John Ross is the element that they needed to stretch the field, maybe Andy Dalton's able to take even a further step into fantasy value.
Yeah, I really, as you see, I picked Eli Manning 3 picks before Andy Dalton went. I really had a tough decision between the two. Knowing what I know now about unfortunate situation of Odell Beckham's ankle, I may have picked Andy Dalton, but hopefully, God bless, he gets back on the field week 1, and I have a fantasy starter in Eli Manning. But Andy Dalton, yeah, definitely good points made about Andy. I think he's locked and loaded quarterback 1 this season. We'll see if Gomez profits from that in round 9. What really stood out to me, I think this is obviously due to his salary cap number, but sometimes you got money to burn. It's Devontae Parker. He goes off the board to Tony at 908. I like this value. I could bet a lot of other owners would have bid at Parker had his salary been lower. So Tony, with the salary cap to throw around, I think this was a great pick.
Also have to say that given that Tony just made a trade the day before to clear some cap and trade away Jarvis Landry, taking Devontae Parker is interesting because he clearly is the receiver with the most upside on that team. We've kind of seen what Landry is, which is PPR machine, gets a ton of catches every year, 90 plus. He's that guy and reliable in a lot of senses, but given our format, might not be the most valuable asset at the moment. Devontae Parker, meanwhile, they drafted him early in the first round for a reason. They see some great upside with him. And last but not least, Jay Cutler's already shown to pick a receiver and just force feed them targets, regardless of if they're open or not, regardless of if the defense is allowing it, regardless of if they're even capable of catching it. He's going to throw it at them. He seems to kind of be leaning towards Devontae Parker being that guy, given what we've seen in preseason already and some recent commentary about how he likens Devontae Parker to Alshon Jeffrey. So we'll see what Devontae Parker renders. I also got to give Tony an additional tip of the cap for willing to risk a shot for this pick. He wasn't sure if Devontae Parker was taken yet at this point in the draft, and he said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. Has Devontae Parker been taken?
Yeah, that shows a lot of trust in a player when you're willing to down a shot of what could be perhaps 3-year-old Jameson. So, yeah, you definitely could tell Tony wanted that player. I completely agree with you on Devontae Parker. I think at this point in the draft, you measure upside versus floor. He's got the upside to be a top 10 wide receiver. And you're right, Jay Cutler does like to pepper his number one with targets. See Brandon Marshall in Denver. You see Alshon Jeffrey in Chicago. But I think Devontae Parker's floor could be below his teammate Kenny Stills. So a lot of variance there, but we'll see how that turns out. All right, moving on to round 10, our last and final round. This is completing the rosters for most people, so not a lot of sexy picks here, but we'll go through it anyway. We've got Adam Vinatieri, Areola, throwing another patented pass in there. We've got Blair Walsh, CJ Prosise, Sebastian Janikowski, Ryan Suckup, Matt Breida. First pass by Tony, the New York Giants defense, and Mason Crosby. Not a lot to dissect here, Nor, but what do you got?
I think it's clear that Areola wants to be like a down-the-field passing game type of offensive coordinator because he loves passing. This guy is all about it.
Yep. He's definitely going to lead the league in pass attempts. I'll give you that. So not a lot to dissect here, and I refuse to discuss kickers on this draft recap. So let's talk about one of the two skill position players to go in this round. That's CJ Prosise. Do you see any relevance for the converted wideout in Seattle?
Sort of jumping off the Jarvis Landry point, I think Prosise in a PPR format, a little bit more upside. He is clearly a very good athlete and very capable pass catcher, being a converted receiver, as you said. But sometimes with these Seattle running backs, it's sort of similar to the New England running backs where you just kind of got to pick one and then hope that you kind of get lightning in a bottle where who can survive the rigors of the season, who can not put the ball on the ground and stay on the field, all those things. You've got Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls generally in front of Prosise, or in the mix, you should say. Lacy, I think we already have seen what Lacy's about in terms of NFL and fantasy production. He tends to be a starter everywhere he goes. He tends to get replaced. That's kind of the Eddie Lacy story. Rawls, I think, is the guy they truly want to be the starter, but he can't stay healthy. He can't seem to stay on the field. So I think Prosise ends up getting a fair amount of work and or touches, and the Seattle offense in general, given a healthy Russell Wilson this year, I think they want to go back to their bread and butter of relying on the running game, being able to go play action, and let Russell get out and break the pocket and attack downfield.
All right. That's a good analysis there. So that's the end of the 10 rounds. Let's finish up with some roster outlooks. What's some things that after restricted free agency, after the draft, what stood out to you in terms of people's overall complete rosters?
A big question to me right off the bat is, what's Slater's plan here? He's got $50 in cap room, but he knows he has to set aside some for when Zeke comes back. So is he looking to make a trade now? Is he waiting until just before and maybe try and sneak one in right before week 6 or 4, depending on Zeke's suspension outlook? It's going to remain to be seen. Secondary to that, Kevin. He's sitting at almost $100 of free cap. It's easy to assume that a big trade is looming. It'll be interesting to see who he targets and who he goes for. And will one of those young receivers be a key bargaining chip in terms of the trade?
I completely agree. Kevin's team has me worried. He's shown the talent and savvy to make the championship game each of the last 4 years, but I think this year he's really going to have an uphill climb to make the playoffs. Maybe it was getting a bit too monotonous and he really wanted to challenge himself this season. I don't know. Tony's team looks deep at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. I think he's set up for sustained success. But I'm really interested to see what Areola does with his roster, as he only has $5.5 in available cap. but only 12 active players. I doubt he'll be able to move McCoy or Evans, so it'll be a question of moving Gillislee at 10, Tyreek at 7, Jamison Crowder at 12, or Kelsey at 12. He has to move a usable fantasy asset to be viable for 16 weeks, so we'll see how he decides to play it. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around. Hopefully you will stick with us until the end of the season as we aim to bring you an informative and entertaining addition to the Gridiron Gala. Please feel free to reach out with any suggestions of things you want to hear. Until next time, this has been another episode of the Dual Threat Podcast.
Peace out!